time for today's coffee chat. And this week we're focusing on numeracy. So Linnell's going to take the lead and talk about an example of a child who won't learn numeracy. So over to you, Linnell.
Thank you, Gail. So I'm going to share a story about a student we'll call Reese. And he was in his 4th year at school, but he was quite disruptive in the maths class. He would get into fights with children near him. He'd be very sensitive about any comments they would make, and it would distract him from his work, or he'd be distracting them from their work. He was unable to finish any work. Even if I reduced the amount for him, he wouldn't get started unless he was given one-to-one instructions to do so. So I didn't know whether it was that it certainly appeared that he wouldn't do the work. It was a won't. But I needed to find some evidence about that.
Yep, and those sorts of behaviours, they're typical of all learners. Even sometimes when I've presented to groups of teachers, I've found that if they didn't really want to be there, they could behave in quite challenging ways in a workshop. So it's not just children, preschoolers and children in your class. It's something we all do if we want to avoid failure, avoid looking bad, and we choose not to be part of it. So what are you thinking, Linnell, you might do to figure out if it's can't or won't, and how you might go forward?
Well, I do know that this child has a lot of complex behaviour difficulties. I've known him for a long time. I've known him since before he came to school, and I know issues on the playground. And I know that he's got learning difficulties because I've been able to observe that for quite some time. But that didn't mean I had an excuse to opt out and say, well, that's just the way he is and there's nothing I can do about it. So I put that as a challenge to myself, that I had to find out what he could do and whether or not the behaviours were coming out of wanting to appear, what's the saying? It's some students would rather be naughty than to be seen as dumb. So this is something that is worth exploring. I did more observations in class, and it was interesting. I noticed I used to have a routine at the beginning of classes, because counting is such an important activity, even up to 4th grade. So we'd be counting in the 3 and 4 digit numbers, and I would find out as I would listen closely to him that he was just mouthing. He really didn't know the counting routines.
Yep.
And I also was sharing with him a hundreds chart one time, and I said, find the number. He couldn't find the number on the hundreds chart without starting from 1. So that told me, oh dear, we've got some problems here with some basic skills, some basic visual models, and that was a starting point.
Okay, so you needed to, I guess, gather more evidence about, how you were going to change what was happening in the room, and maybe also about what you were going to teach, or what the classroom teacher might take on board to teach Reese. So
Yeah.
what sort of evidence did you, what sort of changes did you make?
Well, certainly I had to change what I was going to expect of him, and we had to make sure that the examples that I was expecting him to do in independent practice had been covered in my introductions and in the guided practice, but were pitched at a level that he was going to have some success with, and reduce the amount as well, because I really wanted to make sure he had some success. I call it bringing the goalposts closer. So even if it was, look, Reese, I just want you to do 3 independent practices today. That was one big aspect around the content. I also explored further around the behaviour. I had a long conversation with him around whether he wanted to behave in class, and the fact that it was distracting others, and he wasn't learning, and would he like to learn?
Yeah.
And I got the strong message that yes, he would like to learn. So we actually set up a contract of behaviour between us. It was just a very private little folder where I said, I'll give you ticks or stickers just quietly if you are.
Yeah.
To yourself, hands to yourself, eyes to the front, not getting distracted by others. And I also found out what really excited him. What was his motivation was he wanted to be the classroom teacher for our Guess My Number activity.
Okay.
And he worked really hard for that.
Okay. So by motivating and finding out what things he really wanted to do, you were able to turn him on to maths, to doing and to starting work and attempting it. Also, I really like the way you use that contract to set some specific goals and specific behaviours, because if he hasn't got eye contact with you, you know he's probably not listening.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's not listening, then he's unlikely to learn. So how did that end up? How did that go with Reese?
Went really well. So it was a combination, you can hear. I had to work on what he could do and change that. And I also had to work on motivation around what he didn't want to do.
Yep.
The seating plan was very helpful. I had to do many configurations of seating plans to try and find one that worked. So don't think that happens overnight. But I did find, as you said, Gail, I needed him close to me, just so I could do some little gentle prompts of, walking along the front of the room and just gently pointing to his page if necessary, or just gently, eyes on me. And he was very motivated by that external teacher role.
I found that also by, hooking into what they want to do and giving a whole class instruction around, are you listening? Can I see all of your eyes? And can I see your smile? Because if you're smiling at me, I know you're listening, and I can probably also see your eyes.
Yeah.
So making it a really positive thing to be attending, and focusing on when students near Reese in that seating plan are actually looking at you, the teacher.
Yes.
So, a lot of behaviours that are challenging, sometimes we try to focus on that student. And instead of doing that, because by focusing on what that student's not doing, you're giving attention to that inappropriate behaviour. By trying to look at the student maybe sitting next to them or two away and giving them a positive, you're taking the emphasis off that inappropriate behaviour.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they see that, by looking at the teacher, by being ready to start work or starting work, reinforcing those behaviours ends up becoming something that's part of the class culture. So it's not just helping one student like Reese, it's helping a lot of students who might be slow to start. So I really like that, using the whole class and the seating plan to bring him on board and improve his learning of numeracy in terms of him wanting to do it.
That's right. And there was two other things. We had to plug his skip counting difficulties, and I had to plug his familiarity with hundreds charts, because that was a tool I wanted him to use in independent practice. I did some of that with small groups at times, but I also hopped it into the beginning of the numeracy warm-up with the number sense focus that I did every day, so that everybody was benefiting from a review opportunity, and he could hear other people's answers, and he could hear the correct counting sequence, and he could see other people familiar with hundreds charts. And it was a really gentle way for him to fill those gaps without him feeling very identified and withdrawn to do something that he couldn't do.
Yeah, I really like that combination of whole class, small group and individual work. And I think that's something that teachers can take away and try this week and think about, how they could use that with their class and come back to us on Thursday with what they've found. I think that would be really wonderful. So thanks so much for including that example with Reese. I think having a concrete example is great, and hopefully we'll have lots of posts and people coming to see us on Thursday. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for now. Bye.
Bye now.